Welcome to Where Are They Now?, where we reach into the archives of Lenape, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Seneca high schools and invite selected alumni to share their memories and fill us in on their career paths after commencement. Since Lenape's first graduating class in 1961, Shawnee's in 1972, Cherokee's in 1978, and Seneca's in 2005, over 77,000 individuals have received diplomas from these four schools. Join us now for another Lenape District alumni interview on Where Are They Now?
Hello and welcome to Season 20 of Where Are They Now? I'm Mark Sonsini, a 1996 graduate of Cherokee High School, and today we'll be talking with another Cherokee alum from the class of 1997. He is a communications consultant residing in Voorhees, New Jersey. I'd like to welcome Jason Springer to the show. Jason?
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Really excited to hear about your career since Cherokee. But before we get into that, let's go back and talk about your time at Cherokee a little bit. You grew up in Marlton?
I did. I was from Marlton. I was a Jaggard boy and then Marlton Middle, and my parents lived across the street from the high school, so I didn't get a bus. I walked. and then my mom laughed because I would want to drive my car once I got my license across the street to park at Cherokee.
We have to show off to everybody that you have your license
Absolutely.
and have a car. So
Can't be walking to school.
Any siblings at Cherokee with you?
My younger brother graduated class of 2000, so we were both Cherokee boys.
Okay, Jason and Jared. Let's talk about some activities you were involved in at Cherokee. One of the big activities you were involved in was the newspaper club.
I was. It's funny. We'll talk about the professional side, but when you're prepping for these things, you look back and working after school with the newspaper, I learned how to tell stories and put stories together and come up with headlines. And in my career, I ended up becoming a storyteller. So you look back and you're like, I guess I did start some of those things when I was in high school. I didn't know where I was going, but I had some ideas of what I wanted to do. I did the architectural design, engineering design. I did some of the architectural competitions. And again, it's funny because part of my business, as we'll get to, is web design. That scratched my creative itch. So I like to design and be creative, and I like to tell stories. And if I look back, two of the main things that I remember and did through Cherokee were those activities.
Yeah. Any other special memories from Cherokee or friends maybe that you still keep in touch with?
I still keep in touch with a bunch of people. I mean, my best friend and I were both Cherokee boys. He's in Orlando now. We still keep in touch. It's always fun. I mean, I'm in Voorhees, but people are here in the area, so you run around, you see people that you were in school with. It's always fun to kind of go back to that day for a little bit.
It is. Okay, so then after graduating Cherokee, you're off to college at Rutgers in New Brunswick, and you go in for engineering. Tell us about that.
I thought, yes. Yeah. That was my plan. I thought I would be an engineer. That did not happen. After 2 years, it wasn't for me. The calculus was not my friend. I did fine with the other stuff. And I took a semester off and kind of grew up a little bit. I worked full time while living at school. Realized I wanted to be in school, but wanted to do something else. And so eventually tried a bunch of different majors. So for whoever doesn't know what they want to do, I'm your example. You can figure it out. I think I had 9 declared majors, which drove my parents insane. But the best thing for me was I got to try a lot of different areas, eventually settling in psychology as a minor, which for me was the best thing to understand people's emotions as I tell stories, and political science as a major, which was the path that I ended up following in my career.
All right, so let's talk about that. You graduate with that degree, and then you start your career in political science. You're traveling around the country for the first time.
I had never been west of Pennsylvania. I always joked my family, we would vacation to Florida, or even when they took a cruise, they went to Canada. Who does that? We didn't go to the Caribbean or anywhere. So I get hired a couple weeks before I graduate college. I get a call on a Saturday night. Are you interested in talking? And 3 weeks before graduation, it's like, can I call you Monday? I'm just going out.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, no problem. We just have one question. I'm like, okay. They're like, what do you think of failure? I had already taken a semester off, changed my major, had 9 majors. I'm like, failure is not a bad thing. Just learn from your mistakes. And they go, you're hired. I go, for what? They go, call us Monday. So I called them Monday. It was a company in DC that trains political campaign staff and sends them around the country. And I was supposed to go to South Dakota to work on a US Senate race.
Okay.
A couple days in, I said, look, I'm already going to South Dakota. If you can send me someplace where I get a little more responsibility, I'm going. And they said, if you go to Iowa, we'll let you manage a campaign. So I was 22 in a town of 137 people managing a political campaign. It's eye-opening.
A little bit of culture shock for you?
Yeah, they laughed at me a lot. I'm from Marlton, again, never west of Pennsylvania. So this little boy didn't understand why there were balls of hay that were actually bales of hay lying in the field. I didn't understand why they were stone roads instead of gravel roads, because in New Jersey, they intentionally put stone down at a construction site. In Iowa, they leave them that way. They're just, that's one type of road, paved, gravel or just dirt. And so that was a learning experience, but I learned about people, and it was the best thing ever. We're in a rush on the East Coast a lot, and people would say, what's the difference between Jersey and Iowa? And I'd say, well, in Iowa, when they say, how are you doing today? They wait for an answer. Like they have the time, and for us, it's a throwaway greeting sometimes, and you move on to the next thing. And just learning about people in different parts of the country, wherever I traveled, was an experience. And those are things that you combine towards whatever you end up doing as you go forward professionally.
And you got into farming when you were out there as well, right?
Well, I did join the Farm Bureau, but only because I needed health insurance.
Okay.
But that's sort of, it's funny because everything leads to something else. So the joining the Farm Bureau for health insurance led me to working on a candidate for president who was touting healthcare at the time on Howard Dean's presidential campaign. So you never know. But no, I was not the farmer. That was not ever going to happen. Although I do tell my parents, who I love them dearly and still don't know what I do for a living, that I am just a farmer who plants seeds every day to harvest days, months, years from now. Because that's all my business is. It's networking and relationships, and then telling stories through that networking and relationships.
See, it all comes full circle.
Everything.
So tell us about the actual work you're doing, the political work you're doing out there on these campaigns in Iowa.
So my first campaign, I was a campaign manager. I had a woman who ran very hard, but it was unlikely she was going to win regardless of who was out there helping her. But they let me learn at 22. You're in Iowa, which I was not the political person before I got into things. So I didn't realize the Iowa caucuses and where I was and what I could do. I almost worked for John Kerry and John Edwards' campaign. I ended up working for Howard Dean because they gave me more responsibility. I had 4 counties in Northeast Iowa. They called it God's country. It was like Dubuque, Clayton, Delaware, and Allamakee counties, like the map where Minnesota connects with Wisconsin and Illinois there, right on the Mississippi River. It was beautiful. Field of Dreams was in my congressional district. And for a sports fan, that was like unbelievable.
Sure.
So it was great. I mean, I got to be out there and working with people and getting experience. And you know about Howard Dean's campaign and how that ended. I thought I was going to New Hampshire, and instead I came back to Jersey.
So yeah, tell us about that. Everything's going well, looking great for his campaign, and then the infamous speech that I'm sure a lot of people remember. But you didn't know kind of how it was being received by everyone else. Tell us about that.
No, not. And so the interesting thing is the journey of that campaign. So I started when we were in 8th place with no money. I was one of the first 20 people on the ground. So none of us really expected to be the leader going into the last few weeks of the election. And we were all real young. And I always say, I don't know that we are all ready for prime time. In terms of the pressure that would be on you at the end of the race.
Sure.
The last weekend of the campaign, they had run something called the Perfect Storm, where they brought volunteers in from around the country to help out. And so in the room the night that Howard Dean, quote, screamed, were all these people screaming back at him. So he's on the stage coming through the TV as if he's saying all these places he's going to a quiet room. And people in the room couldn't hear anything because they were yelling back.
Okay.
So it's like an hour or two later, and I'm like excited. I'm telling my parents I'm going to New Hampshire. We finished in 2nd. This is amazing for us. And then I find out that we are not going to New Hampshire, that the campaign is basically done because of how the evening ended, and I am going back to New Jersey, which was a real experience in the media, because what I saw on TV was not the picture painted to me by people in the room.
Right.
And so there was a disconnect that I didn't understand. And on that campaign, we weren't allowed to talk to the press. I was a field organizer. So like the reporters would joke with me, how you're not allowed to talk to me. and then you see this happen with the media and you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I came back to Jersey.
Were you upset and dejected at that point because of how it sort of ended, or?
I would say I was shocked. Like, I don't think there was any scenario at that point where we thought the campaign would end the day after Iowa. Right. You figure there's a couple tickets coming out of the state to move on to the next state, and so you're going to go there and be the staff there. And it just abruptly ended because he became a meme of himself, whether he should have or not. You can debate the merits of what happened, but I always tell my candidates that I work with, they can't print it if you don't say it, and anything you say can will be used against you in a Google search. Bill Maher had that rule. And so Howard Dean did it, and then he had to own it. Whether that's the way it occurred or not, perception is reality. And so we were done.
All right, so you come back to New Jersey.
For 2 weeks.
Still in the political realm.
So yeah, I head right back out for a romantic getaway on Valentine's Day to run a congressional campaign. And so I ran a race in what was Iowa's first congressional district against the budget chairman at the time. Nobody really expected us to win, but again, I'm 25 years old now running a congressional campaign. Can't pass up that opportunity.
But then you're also feeling like maybe getting into law might be something that interests you. So tell us what you do next.
I was always interested in law. I mean, look, I was a Law and Order kid, so I was always fascinated by the law, but I was the creative kid. Like, I liked the design side. I liked the storytelling side. And so I didn't move towards the actual law side. When I came back to New Jersey, I was trying to start my own business, and I got hired instead to work for a senator and 2 assembly members as their communications director, which was a great experience until New Jersey didn't pass its budget. And at the time, we were being paid a month in advance. So we got paid in like May, and then didn't get paid again until like sometime in July. Okay. Which, would have been okay if my mortgage company didn't want the bills paid. Right. And, my parents obviously would have tried to help, but I don't want to go to my parents at that point. Right. So I decided to do something different and went to work at a law firm and became the marketing coordinator at Flaster Greenberg Law Firm. I started studying for the LSATs. And while I was there, I realized I could help lawyers talk better than I could practice law. But I didn't give up the politics side. I kind of kept doing that on the side.
And eventually you go to work for the Democratic Party in New Jersey.
Yeah, I was doing trainings. When I worked for Howard Dean's campaign and I got there, the first thing that people had, there was 70 people organized through a meetup. I hadn't done anything, and all those people had already connected. And so I realized there was something there with technology. There was a way for campaigns to become more efficient, to use the tools that they had. And so I was doing trainings for candidates. And New Jersey Democratic Party chairman saw me do a training one day and said, will you be the communications director for the state Democratic Party? And so next thing I know, I'm working in Trenton, working with some of the biggest congressional races, legislative races, right in the middle of everything. It was a wild experience for somebody who 10 years earlier didn't know whether he was a Democrat or a Republican, really. I mean, I say that not in a bad way, but I wasn't pushed into politics. I wasn't a legacy. I was somebody who stumbled into it because my grandmother lived in West Palm Beach, Boca Raton area, and was confused in the 2000 election and voted for Pat Buchanan and was upset. And I watched Bush v. Gore and got hooked. So it was not I know where I'm going to go. I'm going to work in political parties. And so it was a different world than I expected.
So then after your time in Trenton, you come back a little bit more local to Cherry Hill, and you're communications director for the mayor.
Yeah, the mayor had gotten elected in Cherry Hill. Wonderful man, Chuck Kahn. I still thank he and his wife for introducing me to my wife. And He co-officiated my wedding, and they knew that I was kind of limited in my time there. I really wanted to go back out and see if I could make it work. I was single at the time without kids, and I just needed to know if I could make it on my own. And then if not, go back in-house. And so I worked with the mayor for a bit of time, and then went back out on my own full time to start consulting with campaigns and businesses and whoever else was out there.
So in 2012, you started JRS Strategies. Tell us about all the different facets of communications that you work on.
Again, an eye-opening experience, because I thought I would just do politics. And then once the campaigns ended in November, I didn't have much work until February or March. And I realized that's probably not a good business model. So in the end, I realized that telling stories is the same no matter what you're selling. It's a question of what the audience is and the intricacies and the changes you make. But in general, whether you're telling a story for a nonprofit or a business or a political campaign or a government entity, you always have to answer the question, why you? And so what I realized is the skill set that I had from campaigns and politics, where we specifically identify audiences and target voters based on their interests and their needs, is something that was applicable in the nonprofit world, looking for donors or supporters, in the business world, looking for clients that have a specific profile.
Sure.
And so for me, it allowed me to kind of combine the skills that I had learned in politics and transfer them over to a business side or a nonprofit world.
All right. So along with JRS Strategies, you're not just doing one thing, you're doing many things. You're a columnist for SJ Magazine. You write the Making Time column, which I think is great. It's all about basically just parenting young kids, right?
It's my journey with my kids. There is no instruction manual to parenting. There is specifically no instruction manual to parenting during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And the crazy, funny stories, the things that they teach me while I teach them, became something that I was told people would be interested in. And look, I didn't see it at first when I was offered the column. I'm like, who's going to read this? But I can't tell you how many places I go, even you who had seen the column, that people are like, oh, I enjoyed that story, or that's an interesting column. Or when my dad passed away a year ago, and I wrote a column about trying to explain it to my sons, the outpouring of people who were going through their own emotions around their parents passing. So you make an impact on people that you don't even realize just by writing your stories out. Now, selfishly for me, I save every copy of the magazine, and I'm going to give it to my boys as our story. It's my story with my wife, with them growing up. And, in fairness, I get my name on the column, but my wife and I do that column together. I get the credit, but it's not just that we parent together. We write the column together because it's our story. So maybe I'll take a draft or she'll take a crack, but in the end, it's got both of our fingerprints, and it represents what we're trying to do with our kids and the challenges that we face along the way. You've read the column. I don't try and write it like I have all the answers. In fact, a lot of time the column is feeling through the answers from start to finish, because I don't know what I'm doing when I start. That's basically parenting. It's scary.
Well, and I think that's what makes it so enjoyable, and why people like it, is because it's relatable. It's everyday things that everyone's, so many people can relate to, all the things you're talking about. And I think that's just what makes it great. And we were talking earlier, I had read the column before, we actually got on the call to actually talk face to face. And then I said, I can picture you reading me the column, because, you write very much like you're speaking to me, which I think is also something people can relate to as well.
Which I told you is hilarious, because that's not how I have to write professionally. So that's been something that's been different for me, to write in a way that's conversational. I can speak and have a conversation all day. I love to talk to anybody, but writing in a way that has ums and short sentences and reflects the way that we would talk in this conversation is not my specialty. But it's cool that when I talk to people that comes across. They can see that I'm trying to have that conversation with them through whatever I'm telling the story with the boys or with my wife.
Yeah. Definitely. So if you haven't checked it out, it's SJ Magazine Making Time column. Very good.
Thank you. Appreciate the plug. So do the editors. I'm sure they'll be happy.
So you said it, you like to talk. So you have a couple other things that you're also doing that. You do a lot of guest lecturing and some pretty big universities and colleges around the country, UPenn, American University, Rutgers, Rowan, Rider. Talk about what kind of things you're talking about in those lectures.
The irony of this is not lost on me or my parents, that it took me a long time to be a better student. And here I am up in front of the class now. Like, my mom used to call me and be like, did you go to class today? And here I am now lecturing in the class. So the irony is not lost on me. I come in for different things. Sometimes I come in for the political side of the world, where I talk about, using digital on a campaign to a politics class. Sometimes it's to talk about my career journey, because I haven't had that straight path. I've had lots of steps forward, steps back. For the first 3 years, I had a degree in college and lost every campaign. And my parents kept saying, we don't understand this. Why do you keep ending up unemployed? So there's different stories that I get asked to tell just because of the experience that I've had. But most times I'm brought into a political science or a political natured class about targeting audiences or digital advertising or presenting yourself in public or developing a message and telling a story. Those are the areas that I often get asked to focus on.
I think it's interesting because, especially in the political aspect of it, in the last 20 years, I mean, the influx of, digital media on those campaigns really must have just transformed how they're run and how, people consume those messages.
When I was working at the law firm, my boss used to ask what I was going to do with my digital knowledge, because I was lucky. I mean, look, life is about luck, okay? Yes, you have to be really good once you get the opportunity, but opportunities present other opportunities. The fact that I worked on Howard Dean's campaign in 2002 and saw what blogs allowed people to communicate from all over the place do, allow meetups to connect, it was something that I've been able to use going forward. As some people look at platforms as the end all. To me, they're the tool to tell the story. And so if you're building a house, you're not going to use a jackhammer to put on the roof. It's the same thing with digital platforms. You have to make sure that your strategy matches your audience, matches, what you're trying to say, where you're trying to say it, when you're trying to say it, and what your goal is. Is your goal just to get people to see you? Or is your goal to get a sale or a conversion or a listener, or whatever your goal is? You have to make sure that what you're doing matches up with that.
All right, so in addition to lecturing, you're also doing the Heart of Sports radio show, which we can see in your background there.
Yes.
You've done interviews, over 400 interviews with athletes, authors, filmmakers, coaches, comedians, musicians. And the question I have is the show is called The Heart of Sports. Why such the different variety of people that you're interviewing, not rather than just athletes or just coaches?
I've been lucky enough to be on the air, I think 7 years now. It's insane to me. It started as a Sunday show, moved to Saturday. Now it's a Friday 4 p.m. show. And the idea was sports has an impact on people, community, societies. Growing up, I listened to sports talk radio. I played sports. I bonded with my parents over sports. I would come from a divorced home when my parents couldn't agree on anything. My dad and my stepdad could agree on taking me to a game. And so I talk on the radio show about the 93 National League Championship, game 1 against the Braves. I was in the upper deck with my dad and my stepdad and my brother. It was the first time the 4 of us were together for anything. And so for me, it's the impact that sports can have on people and the community and society, and the lessons that people can learn, and the platform that athletes can use. And you have so many different people tied to sports. Music and sports is intrinsically linked. We sing before the game. There's halftime shows. People set their highlights to music backgrounds. Authors, people write about it. Filmmakers tell the story. At heart, I'm still a storyteller. It's the same thing I was when I was working with the newspaper at Cherokee High School. And so I'm a storyteller on the radio. And to me, there's a story behind everything. We talked to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about why he was selling off his memorabilia to benefit his Skyhook Foundation. We also talked to him about Joel Embiid. You can do both. You can talk sports and realize that those athletes are making an impact and making a difference. And for us, we've tried to do the same with our platform. So we've partnered with the major league umpires for their umps care initiatives. We've partnered with the American Cancer Society in Philadelphia. We did a Coaches versus Cancer series, interviewing all of the City Six coaches. I don't know if you know, Philadelphia has raised the most amount of money through the Coaches versus Cancer of any market anywhere with what they do. We've partnered with the Covenant House through the NFL Alumni Association. And this year, my co-host and I slept out on our own and got to raise $13,000 for our own team. So for me, this is the next extension of what athletes are doing and should get credit for. A lot of times athletes have their organizations and they do it without the cameras. They go visit a hospital or they do something for charity or for cancer. They don't get the credit. I'm somebody who's spent a living giving people credit for what they do. And I think it's important that you do things that there may not be a camera there for, but you're doing it for the right reasons. And as somebody who read my column, you know that the sleeping out for homelessness turned into a column because it was a teaching lesson for my son who didn't understand why I was sleeping outside and then why little boys and girls might not have a bed at night and where they would put their stuffed animals.
Right.
So for me, I get to tie all of these things together. 13-year-old me used to lie about my age and call into sports radio shows to make my point. 43-year-old me gets to do it on the radio and tie it to everything else I do.
That's great. That's some great work you're doing there. Tell me about some of the favorite people you've interviewed. Who are a couple of your favorites?
Oh man, we've had Hall of Famers. They've been a blast. We've had, it's funny. I like the people who tell more stories. Jesse Washington from The Undefeated is fantastic. We've talked, with he and Doug Glanville, we've done a lot of race and sports and politics, and the things that I'm able to learn from my guests are fascinating. Then you talk to some of the NFL alumni and Hall of Famers about what they do after their playing career. There were some of them that broke housing barriers while they were playing. So the story behind the sports is fascinating. We interviewed from Sports Illustrated. He was the writer of It's Like the Summer of 1984 and all the different things that happened around the Olympics and Michael Jordan and Pepsi and advertising and how that summer and pop culture changed the course of our country going forward. So we've found the stories with the different people we've interviewed, and I've just found it fascinating and been honored to let them tell it to me. Anybody
who really surprised you, like you maybe didn't think it was going to be a really good interview and turned out to be amazing?
So it's not surprised me, but I wasn't sure what we were going to get. We interviewed Matt Stutzman. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's an Olympian. He's called the armless archer.
Okay.
He has no arms, and he is one of the top archers in the world, not just in Special Olympics, in Olympics. And he was adopted and raised by a family of able-bodied adults who never treated him like he had special needs. So he had to learn to operate in a world that did not function for somebody with special needs.
Okay.
And talking to him, he talked about how because people always stared at him, he didn't face pressure when there were big crowds. He was used to people staring at him. We talked to Pratima Sherpa, her dad lived on the side of a golf course in India, and she started learning to play golf, and now she's been sponsored to come over here and is going to probably play on the LPGA tour at some point. She's in school now. So, I mean, the interviews we've been able to have, everybody thinks the big name athletes themselves, their journey is a story. We've talked to Olympians. People who have realized their own kid dreams, just like I have doing the radio show and all the things I get to do. And you hear that emotion come out on the radio. And to me, that's just really cool to be a part of.
Very cool. It is. So these days with the pandemic, you're doing the show, as you're talking to us today, from your basement at home.
Yes. We go in sometimes depending on what the numbers are, but that was sort of a have to adjust. You can't, look, right before my 2-year-old, soon to be 2-year-old, was born a week before everything shut down with the pandemic.
Okay. I
have a 5-year-old, somebody to be 5 this week, my other son. And I wasn't going anywhere. I had a newborn in the house. There was no way I was going into studio and chancing that. I just couldn't. I had to be responsible. And so how do you do a live show when you can't get into the studio? You connect remotely. And so I've got a virtual background, and I've got my mic here, and I've got my little mini studio now to be able to do the show. And hopefully for the average listener, they don't know the difference on the radio. It is different not being in a room with somebody. If you and I were there in person, we would have a different connection than we do through the screen. And that's part of who I am, is making a connection with people when I talk. That's why I think when you read the column, you kind of get the feel when I talk, because that is what I try to do. So there is a barrier doing things remote, but it does allow us to still be connected and do everything.
So you talked about a lot of the work that you do through the show, for different organizations. You also do a lot of work with the Jewish Family and Children Services. Tell us about that.
Look, it's the most rewarding thing I can do. I grew up with divorced parents. We did layaway. I never felt like I didn't have, but I learned when I became a board member at Jewish Family and Children Services that when I was younger, I actually went to counseling through them. And I felt like that was my opportunity to pay it forward and come full circle. For them, I've worked in government and politics for years. How can I help them develop a government relations strategy? I've worked in communications. How can I help them publicize what they're doing? It's an organization that does everything from having a food pantry that feeds people in need, to having counseling services, to giving rides to veterans, to helping grief support groups. I mean, you name it. And the thing that got my wife and I into it, we actually gave it as the giveaway at our wedding. We got cookies from their Soups and Sweets program, which is a special needs program that gives people with special needs kitchen skills so they can get employment. Because you and I have our jobs and our employment. Our employment becomes our identity. Whether it should or not, we can debate that. I happen to think it shouldn't. I happen to think that regardless of your job, you're a good person. Your job just kind of is your interest. Right. But for somebody who doesn't have those skills, who doesn't have that opportunity, what do they do? And so here are these programs where you give everybody the opportunity to have the same happiness and success that I have. And so I'm grateful for the start I got at Cherokee. I'm grateful for the opportunities people gave me along the way. I'm appreciative of what I have now with my own family. And so I want to make sure that other people have those same opportunities. So whether it's the radio show or the column or JFCS, it's my way of doing my little part. Look, I'm not the catalyst with those things. I'm a bit player. There's people who run those groups and do great work every day. But if I can play my little role and help out a little bit, to me, that's the least I can do.
And those people are appreciative and grateful for you as well. You've received a couple of awards along the way for that service. And in 2017, you were one of South Jersey's 40 business people under 40. So you've rightfully so gotten a little recognition along the way.
It is interesting to get recognition or to even do interviews like this when you're not somebody who sought it. So, I mean, I appreciate it and I'm self-deprecating, but I recognize that those awards are only possible because of the people I've worked with. Because if it didn't go well, I wouldn't be recognized.
All right, so let's talk about a little bit more about your family. We talked about, you and your wife writing the column together. Sarah, you've been married for 7 years. And you talked about that the former mayor of Cherry Hill kind of introduced you, co-officiated at the wedding.
We had gone on a date, and then I was still working at the state party all the time. And every time my wife was ready to say, forget this guy, I would send a text message and say hi. She didn't know that I was working like 20 hours a day at that point. So after I had moved over to the mayor's office, she was the gutsy one. She went over to the mayor's wife, and she's like, you got this nice guy in your office. You should say something to him. And so the mayor and his wife created Team Sarah, my wife's name. And a couple days later, I was going to take Sarah out for her birthday, and I went into the mayor and I said, I'm going to leave early today. He goes, oh, where are you going? I was like, taking Sarah to dinner. He goes, oh, Sarah, we need to talk. And he sits down, closes the door in the mayor's office and sits down in this chair next to me, not at the desk across from me. And he puts his hand on my knee and he goes, Stephanie, his wife, and I are on Team Sarah. I was like, I didn't know there was a Team Sarah. He goes, there is, and we're recruiting. He goes, how's that going? He goes, I'll let you know after this conversation. So they are still Team Sarah. They love the fact that we ended up dating and getting married. Yes, they were both at our wedding. The mayor co-officiated the wedding because they're a part of our story. And again, I'm about stories. I'm about the path to get here. This has not been an easy path. The idea that I'm talking to you as somebody that you guys would want to talk to is still interesting to me, because I wasn't somebody who looked at it that way, and I had my ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
And so to recognize that journey is very cool to me all along the way. And the mayor played a part with my wife getting together, and they love seeing that we now have 2 young boys, and they helped start that.
That's great. So you have Adam and Brandon, who we talked about as a kind of a centerpiece of the column. Any other hobbies? Do you have time for anything else? Or you're doing so much?
You know, I got to be honest. Some of the things I do are hobbies. I enjoy things that I get paid to do. So like the radio show wasn't something that I sought out as, oh, I'll take it as a career. It turned into something. So I've been lucky to turn my passions and hobbies into careers. You know, do I still take a break and watch sports? Do I like to, I like to go places with the boys now and with Sarah. It's funny, you learn to see life through your kids' eyes when you have kids. And so I take my kids over to my parents' house, and they still live in the house that I lived in when I was little, and we drive past Cherokee, and they point to the fields and the school, and they go, "That's where you went to school, Daddy." And then they're at my parents' house, where it's got the same things that I broke when I was a kid in that house that they're now playing with, or it's finding a playground with the kids. So it's funny, when there's free time now, it's less about finding stuff for me and finding stuff to do with them, because there's so much else to do. But I also try to incorporate them in it. I mean, that they're not down here now for this interview, but the kids love to come down to the studio and speak into the camera and the microphone. Oftentimes they will try to join in on a business Zoom.
All right, well, next time we'll have to have them on with you. And
No, they're much more entertaining than me, and they're better looking. So yeah, I'll take them around a restaurant, and somebody like, "They're so cute." And I'll turn to my little guy and be like, "Nobody ever says that to Daddy, bud."
Yeah, well, that's one of the things we have to deal with as parents.
Kids, all right.
So let's talk about plans for the future. Any aspirations of running for office?
No, thank you. I have the utmost respect for people that have that title, especially in this climate. It's very difficult. As somebody who has helped them manage, I have more respect for people who, I know there's a lot of people who question them. Like when I would consult with candidates, they're like, "I'm going to say that I'm a different kind of politician." I'm like, yeah, okay, nobody's going to believe that. Like, you can say whatever you want, but people have their preconceived ideas. My preconceived idea is not everybody in this business is bad, because I've seen a lot of the good people in it for the right reasons. And the things that they do, but also the commitment of time that they make. I would never see my kids. I would never see my wife. I mean, I've lived that campaign life, staffer life, and finding a balance now as a parent is something that's more of a priority than running for office. But in general, I have no desire to have the title. I don't really seek out the public side of things. I'm perfectly happy being the king or queen maker and putting somebody in position to succeed, as opposed to getting the direct credit myself. I always used to work with my mom and said, I serve at the pleasure of, because if they wake up in the morning and decide it's not my pleasure to serve them, I don't serve them anymore. And so it's I just take that approach every day. If I take it one day at a time, if I keep doing a good job, good things will happen. I followed my instincts when people thought I was out of my mind all along the way. You know, when I told my parents I was going to Iowa, they looked at me like I had 7 eyeballs. When I told them I was coming back to start my own business, they looked at me like I had 14 eyeballs. And so they get it. My mom said, I get it. You have a method to your madness. And so I don't always know where it's going to take me next. You know, I don't seek out a lot of these things. They just kind of happen and come, but I'm going to enjoy the ride. To me, that's my goal, is enjoy whatever happens. Be in the moment. Even when the bad, take something out of it, because that's how I've gotten to where I am. Even at my failures along the way, I've taken something to make me better to succeed next time.
Sure.
And so that's kind of my goal for the future.
Well, that's what it's all about, and it's worked out for you very well so far. So congratulations on all your success and everything you're doing for the community. And there's a lot, I can tell there's a lot left in your story for you to tell. So we'll be interested to see what comes next for you. So thanks a lot for being here today, Jason.
Thanks for letting me tell it here. And thanks to everybody in the district. Good job.
Great having you. And that's all for this episode of Where Are They Now? For other Lenape District alumnus interviews, check us out online at youtube.com/Lenape District TV. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.